Banji Vakorja. Hello, everybody. Eimear Burke here. Welcome to another Fireside Chat. And this is Fireside Chat 167, where I'm in conversation with a member of the Order of Bards, Ovates, and Druids. And as is customary, I will start with a prayer for peace. Gamara Shiakon Fud na Crinne, Gamara Shiakon in our Jaili Ogs in our Jirha, Gunairi Lin Lenar Kuch Garamaka, Galmuj Buichos Jeev, Jeh Chivdaka, Spirit Quivdaka. May peace prevail on earth. May peace prevail in our homes and in our countries. May our missions be accomplished. We thank you, guardian spirits and guardian deities. For peace. As the fever of day calms towards twilight, may all that is strained in us come to ease. We pray for all who suffered violence today. May an unexpected serenity surprise them. For those who risk their lives each day for peace, may their hearts glimpse providence at the heart of history. That those who make riches from violence and war might hear in their dreams the cries of the lost. That we might see through our fear of each other a new vision to heal our fatal attraction to aggression. That those who enjoy the privilege of peace might not forget their tormented brothers and sisters. That the wolf might lie down with the lamb, that our swords be beaten into plowshares, and no hurt or harm be done anywhere along the Holy Mountain, with thanks to John O'Donoghue. So let me see where you're all from. Very cold in Scotland, somebody's asking. Ulster, hello. Maybe slightly warmer than Kilkenny. Well, it's -5 here. I've had snow since Sunday or Saturday here, and it hasn't thawed, and it's rare that it happens. And it says on my app that it feels like -8, so I will believe it feels like -8. And I know for those of you in North America, -5, -8 is nothing, but it's a big deal here for Ireland. Chilly, wet, cold, Killaloe, Ballina, 16 degrees here. Gabriella, that's Romania, I think. Wyoming, finally snowy Wyoming. I don't know what it's like in Kiev from Olena. Lovely. Queensland, Australia. Well, of course, it's summer there. Chile, Hampshire, West Lothian, Scotland, wonderful. Auckland is sunny in New Zealand, lovely. Vaguely brisk, but sunny greetings from Calgary. Anyway, lovely to see you all. I hope you all had a good solstice or Christmas or holiday, Hanukkah, whatever you were celebrating, and welcome back. Same temperature here in Sweden, says Lillian, and it feels warm. That's lovely. No snow in Nebraska. Brilliant. Warm in Auckland, yes. Southern California. I'm sorry about all of you in California, Los Angeles, with those terrible fires. It's just such heartbreaking. It must be so terrifying for people. Greetings from Alaska, chilly Slough. Anyway, we are going to the UK, and I've just realised I'm not too sure where we're going, but let me introduce you to my guest this evening. It's Gary Llewellyn. Gary, you're so welcome.
Hello, everyone. Borada. So
where are you?
I'm in Hampshire, fairly near the New Forest. 20-minute cycle ride. Yeah, and it is chilly. Not too bad though.
So, what's your landscape like in Hampshire?
So the bit that I live in is between two rivers, the Test and the Itchen. And a lot of that, I guess, would be floodplain. But we have the South Downs fairly close. We have the Isle of Wight, just a small expensive boat journey away. New Forest, just the other way, just to the west, and fairly close to Salisbury Plain as well. So an absolute treat in terms of places to go and places to see. Yeah.
So it's like you're in the middle, or like you're at the...
Yeah, just nestled. In fact, next to the Isles of Scilly, and the very bottom of Cornwall, it's one of the sunniest places in the United Kingdom.
Wow.
I know. And we've got nice PV panels, photovoltaic panels, all pointing south. So we can feel very smug and slightly warm as well.
Yeah, I've been to the New Forest. I mean, I was there at the Druid Gorset. What was it, last year? No, 2023. And that was my first time at the New Forest, and I was just blown away by it.
It's an amazing mix, because of course you think of a forest and you think of it's trees all the way, and of course forest comes from a hunting reserve, but there's large areas of grass lawn as well, and bogs and mires. It's rich in history and lore, myth, but also rich in terms of what it can tell us in past climates through the bogs.
Okay, and you've got your New Forest ponies as well.
And New Forest ponies, although unlike the Exmoor and Dartmoor ponies, the commoners of the New Forest have mixed them with slightly more conventional breeds to make them more sellable, which makes them less authentic. But it's still lovely to see them. Although we're always reminding people that they are not pets and they shouldn't be fed. They've got a reputation for biting, which is only fair enough.
They're wild, aren't they?
They are wild, yeah.
Okay, beautiful. Wow. Yes, so you're in the Sylvan Grove, aren't you?
I am in the Sylvan Grove, yes. Although I spent a fair amount of time on my own. And that contrast between working on my own, doing solo ritual, and ritual within a group has proved, enlightening, interesting.
Just isn't. What for you is the difference, or I mean, energetically, or what do you get from a solo ritual that you don't get from a group, and vice versa?
A solo ritual, your intent can be far more keenly directed, and you can tailor that ritual to serve your own needs. With a group, you have to compromise, but you have that greater energy of working with other people, especially a group that you've worked with a lot, and you have a fairly common intent. It'll never be as specific as yourself, but working with a well-tuned group that have a common cause is a wonderful, powerful thing. And even though I work with the Sylvan Grove as a group and a few other organizations or groups as a group working together in ritual, I still use solo ritual for some things.
Okay, beautiful. I love that idea that the fine tuning of an intention is so much easier on your own, and then obviously, and then the compromise with a group is that you get greater energy, but less. Well, maybe unless you're doing it for one particular purpose. But yes, there's always those sub intentions within a group that are there as well. Gabriella says, for me, the group ritual amplifies the energy, like everyone is a crystal, and the intent and light connects and shines through everyone. With solo ritual, I personally get to focus better. Yeah, just beautiful. So, what's your background in terms of spiritual background, and how did you find Druidry, or Obod, or how did Druidry find you?
I'm very conscious it's a very common story. Most people will say, oh, in my teens, I think, I found a spirituality and I think I've always been a druid. And that's pretty much true for me. There was something that drew me to the hedgerows and to the woods. And I remember when I was fairly young, certainly in my teens, mid-teens, it was a time when there was a lot more freedom. We could just disappear off on a Saturday morning and say, I'll see you on Sunday. We're going to bivouac in the woods. And there were a few times when I would deliberately sleep in trees just to be with the tree the whole of that night and hear the woodland moving under me and around me. So there was that. For convenience, we would go to my sister and I were sent to Sunday school, where I later found I had a certain notoriety because I would go in with a notebook and they'd say something and I'd go and check it up and then come back and say, you've said this, but I found elsewhere in the Bible it says that. So they tried to whisk me into the choir as soon as they could.
Yeah, I was the expense.
And then eventually I got thrown out of the choir for playing poker and evening song. But the two good things about the choir and being involved in that community were we could get access to the crypt. and we could climb the yew trees in the churchyard without getting told off.
Oh, brilliant.
So it's kind of wrapped with that, but I'll probably mention this a little bit later, but that there was a church fete where I got a horse brass that made a difference, and developed into a divination I probably started using from when I was 11, 12, something like that.
Okay, now I'm lost. So I understand what a horse brass. That's those little things that hang on saddles and things, all right? So you had one, and you started divining. So
I had one, and it was intriguing. Then I got two more, and then I built it up to 8. So effectively the one, and then 7 others. And I used that for years and years and years. And I should say, at that time, there were a number of influential television programs. There was one called Robin of Sherwood, which
yes,
must have been mentioned in the past. And some people outside of the UK might be less familiar with Robin of Sherwood, but it was a very spiritual program, and introduced lots of concepts that felt really good and really wholesome, and introduced the concept of an entity they called Hern, but was probably far closer to Canunos. But there was also a program, a series called Moon Stallion, that was for children. And this was full of magic. And in that, they had someone who was divining with horse brasses. So I basically used this as a template and developed it from that. And I still use horse brasses. It built up to a far larger number. And I always said to myself that the number that defined my set of horse brasses would be until I got a very, very specific one. So I grabbed them here because that was the very first one, and that marks the center of the divination that I conduct. Okay. That sits on my altar and has pretty much for most of my life. And the one that defined that the set was complete was this one.
I can't see what's in the middle.
Is it's that a skull and crossbones.
Oh, okay.
And it's essentially casting them, and
how do you use them in your hand and just drop them, or how do you? Because they're big.
They're fairly big. I've got I've actually got hundreds of them, but there are about 80 that I use. So I will pick 7, and I will either cast them over my shoulder or cast them without looking at them, not picked. And sometimes I get other people to pick them, and we'll cast them close. And this one will be in the middle of a horse blanket, and the proximity to this one determines what's happening. And if they're inverted, then it's a concealed effect. And there are correspondences with certain horse brasses with the Major Arcana in tarot, and the Elder Futhark in the rune sets, and many that fulfill different functions. And it's served me well. It may not serve other people, but it served me well, and it's the main source of divination I use.
Wow. There's a question from Liz. Did you derive this divination practice, or is this something that's been going on for a while?
No, I drew the inspiration pretty much completely from this fictional.
What was the program called? Moon what?
Moon Stallion.
Moon Stallion.
Brian Hales, I think, was the author, and it would have been about 1974, something like that.
Oh, it's quite a long time ago. Yeah,
but the method I use is very similar to one that would be used for casting rune stones in heathenry. Although I didn't realize that at the time, I can guess that was probably the motivation that the author used for his horse mage.
Well, fascinating, because I mean, I suppose you can divine with anything. Interesting. Sean Tansey, who said, "What's a horse brass?" This is interesting. Some sort of saddle decoration. All my life working with horses, and I've never heard of them. I even well, that surprised me. Even I heard it. Horse brass.
There are some records of them being used for magical purposes. The horse brass collectors will will say there's nothing magic about them at all, but they were used by some of the travelling folk, and the travelling folk of across Britain were able to utilise things that were useful for their own ends and provide a mystical use. And there are some that are just amazing. I'm not going to show you all of them, but I'm going to show you this one, because this one is meant to be George, one of the kings, George V, I think.
Okay.
But it looks so much like a druid.
It does. I'm looking at this collar,
I mean,
like a
the
torch.
rays of an Arwen at the top.
Yeah. That's fascinating.
Anyway, there we are.
So there's questions here now. Jules Weaver, how fascinating. I ride Western style and I'm unfamiliar with horse brasses. How are they used on the saddle?
A decoration, essentially. The harnesses are drab and brown or black, and having some shined up horse brasses would just make them glitter and provide a measure of colour. So they were probably less used for horses that were deployed for ploughing, but more those horses that were used for carrying a dray full of barrels of beer, or perhaps a cart that was pulling milk.
Okay. So there are lots of interested in this. And of course, Brian Hales, according to Pat Booker, wrote for Doctor Who. And she thinks he invented the Ice Warriors. Now, I don't know the Ice Warriors.
No, I think he did.
Wow. Now, there's people here paying attention. But I think you'll be surprised you would use horse brasses for divination, but I think you can use any system for divination. You can create your own. I think
it's just symbols, and as long as you codify the symbols in a consistent way, yeah.
Absolutely. I think it's just beautiful. Dr. Ulvan says, love this. Divination is not something I've delved into at all. Either I would be bad at it, or worse, I'd be good, great, and the future would hold no mystery to me. Well, there you are. Everything comes with its bit. That's absolutely interesting. Jules says, in my opinion, horses bring magic all of their own, and I absolutely love horses. Don't get enough time with them. Do you have any connection with horses?
When I was young, I was very fortunate that my sister made friends with someone whose mother owned a stable. So I was lucky enough to go off riding for probably about 2-3 years in my teens. Mm-hmm. She got bored with riding really, really quickly, but I carried on for as long as I could. In fact, it must have been until I was about 14. So, yeah. So I love horses, but I haven't ridden for a long time.
I had a ride 2 years ago, for the first time in 31 years. Loved it. I still kept my back straight, but I was very sore. But what I've had is healing experiences with horses, not riding them, but actually really, really wonderful, fascinating experiences with them. There are loads of things here. Sean have you brought your divination practice into group work with your Grove?
Yes. Yeah, we have. And in one of the camps that I help to run, we do a dawn ritual.
Okay.
To Epona. The camp has got a patron of Epona, and at that dawn ritual, we tend to cast the horse brasses to see what is in store for us. And at the with the ritual workshops that we run in Glastonbury, there was one of the groups last year, possibly the year before. We took a small group of us up to the top of Glastonbury Tor and cast some horse brasses there.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful.
And then brought back the divination that we had determined to the group the next morning.
Wonderful.
So yeah, it's amazing how well it works. And of course, there you can use another interpretation. You can kind of get people to pick a brass and place their own interpretation on it, and then put it in a bag and randomly cast them. So it separates the bias or the interpretation from me.
Okay.
One step further.
Beautiful. I mean, there's no end to the creativity. And of course, when you're so
And,
flexible, it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger.
mm,
Gabriella wants to know, is there any connection to Rhiannon in the practice?
well, I mean, in myth and legend, that there are obvious associations with Celtic horse goddesses, and Rhiannon and Epona and Macha, I mean, are likely to have a link. With myth and legend, it's a little tricky because, of course, the Epona that the Gauls followed may well be subtly different from the Epona that was evolved for the Roman cavalry regiments. So there are associations, but there are also differences. The Epona sitting side saddle with a cornucopia of bounteous goods may be subtly different from Rhiannon, who is probably one of the most powerful, impressive female characters in the Mabinogi.
Yes, I remember thinking, as when I was younger, thinking, oh, I'd love to ride side saddle. It looks so elegant, but I would kill my back.
Mm.
I don't think it's good for anybody. So, I mean, riding properly astride a horse seems to make most sense now. And that's where you got your power. Just interesting, the contrast with I suppose, the benevolent, bounteous Epona with her cornucopia as opposed to Rhiannon on the horse straight. Lloyd says horse brasses were commonplace in Birmingham on shire horses pulling canal barges.
Yeah. Another example where a workhorse is there on show, in the same way that the canal barges and the butties were, brightly painted, just to show a little bit of pride.
Beautiful. Yeah. Wow. So, I mean, you are, I suppose, many skilled. I would describe him as a Gary Savildonach. So, for those of you who may not know, but we have Lou Savildonach, one of our mythical gods. Savildonach means many skilled, and Gary here is one such many skilled person. He was our MC at our Eisteddfod at the Winter Gathering, and he had his maiden voyage, and he was brilliant. He was an act all of his own, and very entertaining, and a brilliant holder of space. But you're also a storyteller. So you've promised to tell us a few short stories, not short stories, but stories that are short.
I can keep them. I can keep them to about an hour. That's fine.
Brilliant. So, would you like to tell one now?
Oh gosh. Would you like a tale from myth and legend of Northern Europe, or would you like a tale that is profound and educational, or would you like a tale that will chill your very bones?
Now, I'm going to. There's a bit of a delay, so I'm just hoping people can respond very quickly. Are you asking me, or are you asking our?
Asking everyone. Shall I just dive into one?
Do. Yeah.
Right. In deference to the Irish, I'm going to tell a tale that starts with King Mythic of Ireland striding across the land. Striding across the land because it's his land. He rules the land. Although in truth, Mythic was never sure of his own decisions and would often seek the counsel of others, just to make sure that the whispering voices within the court were happy, and all were happy with what he was doing. He was pondering a matter that he'd been given conflicting advice when he happened upon a cool, clear lake. I say cool because the frost was scattered around the ground, but the lake itself was not frozen over. And as he looked, there was a tumultuous movement in the water, and something appeared. A head appeared in this lake, and it got bigger, for out of the lake was stepping a giant. This giant had a huge belly, and this giant had red hair, and the red hair spouted from his head, but mainly from the ears and the nose of his head. He had screwed up eyes, and on his back there was a great bronze cauldron. Behind the giant there was another, but this giant was tall and female, a giantess, with long plaited grey hair and brown eyes. And as the giants emerged from the lake, the female giant was heard to say, "Come on, get a move on! Get a move on! Come on, get a move on!" And the one at the front said, "Oh, my dear, I'm hurrying as quickly as I can." And they came to the edge of the lake and they stood there in front of King Mythic. And he said, "Who are you who come from the lake, this lake of the cauldron?" "Go on, tell him, said the taller female giant. And the short giant said, "My name is Llysallais, and I have come to seek you, O king. This is my wife, Eimear, and we present ourselves to you to serve you in your court." "Why would I want you in my court?" "My wife's name is interpreted as pregnant of war, for she gives birth to a fully able warrior and does so regularly, for I am able to assist her in this. I myself am skilled with metalwork, and I make a suit of armor in one day, so that each of them is a fully armed and clothed ready warrior. We will serve in your court." Come to my court," said Mythic. And in the court they were made welcome, and they were given food. And they stayed there, though their manners were terrible. They would cause fights. They would grab food. Every aspect of court etiquette was lost to them. And more children and more armed warriors joined them by their side, and they would all eat voraciously, for the two giants had big appetites, and their warrior-sized offspring had big appetites. In 2 years, there were 20 fully armed warriors, and the advisors in the court came to Mythic and said, "This will not do. There are fights every day. There is more damage caused by these sons of the two giants than in war. And they are getting more and more numerous. Something must be done." King Mythic knew this was the case, and so he considered and came up with a plan. Appealing to Llysallais' pride, he said, "Preparations have been made. We have great admiration for you, but you cause such dismay, and you have not produced anything for me other than hungry mouths to feed. The bronze cauldron that I was carrying is the pyre d'Adonai. It is a cauldron such that if dead are placed in it, and it is placed on a fire, on a low heat, then the dead will be brought back to life. Well, they will be brought back to life to fight again. They will not be able to speak, of course, for to speak, having passed to the other world, is just not something that would occur. But that cauldron I leave that this will surely appease you." It appeased him for a time, but the problem still remained. And so King Mythic called for all of the blacksmiths of Ireland to gather together. And a plan was formed such that they made a great iron house and brought their blacksmith tools and brought their faggots of wood. Llassar was approached and said, "You are such a fine, fine maker of things that we have prepared a competition and we have prepared a great feast for you to show our appreciation for your skills." Llassar and Caimede and the 20 warriors, their sons, were all brought to the Iron House and shown a great feast. They dived in. They were hungry after the walk, and they drank the mead and they ate the food. And the great door to the Iron House was shut and barred, and the faggots of wood were placed around the outside, and the blacksmiths of Ireland set fire to these faggots and used their bellows to feed the fire until the screams could be heard by all in Ireland. But the number of screaming voices diminished. And as the walls glowed red, they thought, surely we have got rid of this menace. It's a pity we could not have taken the cauldron from them. It may survive the heat, said King Matholwch. But where one of the walls was red, the two giants charged their way out, using the cauldron as a battering ram, and proceeded across Ireland and into the sea. Crossing what we would call the Irish Sea, they got to the land of the mighty, and then threw themselves upon the mercy of Vendigator Bran, Bran the Blessed, the king himself a giant. And there they offered the cauldron to him and lived. Now I hesitate to say live happily, because there were other tales, but other tales of Llathol's Skifnuid and what became of the cauldron are for another time.
That is lovely. Well done, well done. I hadn't heard that story about the two giants, and of course it's a Welsh story, although set in Ireland. And
It is.
in our mythology, we don't have Matholwch, but I know certainly in the Welsh, brilliant, absolutely, and beautifully
And it
told.
kind of crosses over, because there's something very, very similar with King the Onnac in Culhwch and Olwen as well. So that tale was a little slice out of the second branch of the Mabinogi.
Beautiful. And of course, we have Janchat created Tuberslania, the well of healing, and every healing herb in Ireland was put into it, and anyone who had died came in and was restored to life as well. So it's wonderful. These so it's a well and a cauldron. Beautiful, beautifully told. Absolutely wonderful.
Thank you.
So now there's more things that you do. Okay, your work. So when somebody had told, I can't remember who it was, telling me, he saves the world. He goes around saving the world. So you're not quite like Santa Claus flying in the air around bringing presents at Christmas or whatever. So account for yourself and explain what it is that person told me that you didn't hear.
So once upon a time, I was a lecturer down in the University of Southampton. So I did a PhD looking at soil contamination and how it could be identified using reflected sunlight. And in 2007, I joined a government organisation in the UK called the Natural Environment Research Council. And I guided the scientific component of the airborne science relating to remote sensing. So we had lots of very fancy bits of kit, including cameras and LiDAR and things called imaging spectrometers that we had in this research aircraft and flew around the world. So we've supported science in every continent of the world. And we did a whole host of stuff. So we were looking at the rift in the Afar in Ethiopia and volcanics and earthquakes there. We were looking at orangutan habitat and palm oil plantations and gas flux in Borneo, zinc smelter fumes in Chile, clandestine unmarked mass graves in Bosnia, sea ice in Svalbard, supraglacial lakes in the middle of the Russell Glacier in Greenland, and lots of other stuff. Looking at habitat to reintroduce the great bustard in Portugal, meandering rivers in France, lots of stuff in the UK as well. So looking at science-based archaeology using the LiDAR, but also positive and negative crop marks in terms of stress effects in vegetation. Yeah, lots of things, lots of stuff to do with woodland. And that carried on with many facets of science related to things that we look at from an aeroplane, including, for instance, identifying minerals
from the air.
From the air, yeah, about 1 or 2 kilometers up, we can identify fairly well a whole suite of minerals, silicates and
down. You mean surface or down below?
Yeah, on the surface.
On the surface of the land. Okay.
Yeah. So what we're doing for vegetation, we're looking at shifts in biochemicals. So not just chlorophyll for photosynthesis, but also xanthophylls and carotenoids and display pigments like aromanthine. But we also look at the shift in the near infrared in terms of the cell structure of the plants and whether they're collapsing or bloating. But in the shortwave infrared, we're looking at the harmonics and overtones of intermolecular bond structures. So without diving into the nature of the electromagnetic spectrum and light and James Clerk Maxwell's observation of the wave nature of light, or indeed Newton's observations of the structure of color and how it's separated. We use reflected sunlight to look at lots of fancy things.
Now, just explain this to me: the reflected sunlight.
For instance, if you think of a plant, the light from the sun comes to the plant, and the plant transfers some of that light with its internal cycles. It captures it and stores it as sugar, but some of that light is reflected out. But because some of it's been absorbed, you can look at the stuff that went in and the stuff that came out and derive what's been removed. So consequently, you've got an idea of the photosynthetic activity that plant has been engaged in.
So I take it you have some machine measuring what comes out.
Yeah, simple as that.
Wow.
It's very straightforward, really.
So, what have you discovered? How did you save us, Gary?
Well, much of it is monitoring and identifying what's occurring. So I can say definitively from my own eyes, I have seen glaciers retreating. I have seen some of the impacts of climate change. I was across in northern Ontario in Canada, looking at mega fires, flying in the nighttime and picking out the fires, and flying in the daytime with the water bombers. And there we were identifying the nature of the fire. So we could look at the not just the temperatures, but the very way that the fire is burning. So traditionally, these forests would have a fire where the top vegetation, the overstory, would burn away, and rather famously, you'd end up with pine cones falling down in the lovely ash, nice open gaps, and everything would grow beautifully. But because we've got climate change, we've got a greater degree of storms that cause the biomass to fall. And then in the dry conditions, you end up with this dry mass providing a carpet. So now the fire goes across the top of the canopy and burns, but then burns hotter as it burns the wood that's sitting there dry on the ground. And that's now scorching the soil. So you can actually lose millions of years worth of soil. The natural cycle where this rich ash would allow new growth is now being interrupted by climate change. And we've been looking at La Nina and El Nino events, and how they're represented in various areas. So there's a huge diversity in terms of what we look at. In terms of the mass graves, there were three things that we were using to identify, and this is following the Bosnian conflict a good few years ago. So when these lads, the young men of communities, were taken into the forest, forced to dig a hole, shot, put in the hole, and it was all covered over. As the bodies decay, the ground sags a little bit, and we can get that from the LiDAR, from the laser beam that hits the ground and comes back. We know the speed of light, we know where the aircraft is, so we can identify the surface and the microtopology. But we also pick out hints of the methane that's being released, and we also pick out in the change of vegetation as the nitrogen elevated soil promotes a different type of growth. So there are a number of coinciding indicators that can be brought together.
So in this case of finding the mass graves, that was kind of detection you were doing?
Yeah, for the prosecutor's office
wow.
in Bosnia to allow some of the redress for some of the war crimes to be carried through, and assist in joining the EU.
Wow. My God. Okay. There's a question Sean has. On the back of your knowledge and experience, is there any particular actions you'd request each of us to make in our own lives, activity, farming, etc., that could make a difference on a local level? That's a big question.
The biggest thing we can do is to care. And unfortunately, we are in a situation where there's a lot of families that are in a very, very tough financial situation. And when voting for our politicians, voting for someone that's going to alleviate the financial situation and provide houses and make food a little cheaper is very, very tempting. But there are some big things that we need to do in terms of getting our politicians to actually care and actually put policies in that will make a difference. I'm not saying any particular party, because ideally, if there was a groundswell where everyone regarded the environment as important, all the parties would be supporting positive climate action. There's a number of very simple things. Most of it is just consider whether you need to drive. If you're just going down the shops, try walking, try cycling. If you're going somewhere, see if someone else is going the same direction and share your journey with in a car. Try not to be wasteful. Turn if you're not in the room, turn the light out. There's lots and lots of little practical things that can be done.
I mean, I grew up that way. You know, people say, "Oh, you my generation. Look what you've done to the planet." Blah 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 blah. I grew up with not wasting anything and repairing everything, and then suddenly inbuilt obsolescence came into the world, and etc. So, do those little things that we can do they really matter? I mean, I know in terms of keeping us focused on caring, how effective are they when you compare, you know, the bigger players in terms of their impact on climate? And I know this is a hard question, and a lot of people
no, it's fine. There are lots of small things, and if everyone is doing them, then they will make a difference. If we I'm not a vegetarian or a vegan myself, but my partner is. But when we eat meat, we tend to eat meat less. She doesn't eat meat, but when my son and I eat meat, we tend to eat it less frequently, and it's normally a better quality. We normally try to make sure that it's organic, free range. That's on one hand because we care about the animals, but on the other hand, it also is positive in that I don't think I would stop eating meat, but that there is something in the process of the carbon use that that means that modern ways of making food have maximized efficiency. I mean, the reason why we've got cheap milk in the supermarkets is because we've got the supermarkets with warehouses full of effectively cage trapped cows being fed, and as soon as their milk yield goes, being euthanized. There are a whole host of small choices that can be made that will make a difference. But as you say, those big choices can only be made by governments, and the governments will only make them if they think they're going to get votes out of them.
I think there's that huge tension between how we live in the present and in the short term, and a long term view. And people say, "Well, I can't afford organic meat." I mean, I'm a meat eater, not much, but when I do, I buy it from an organic farmer.
Yeah.
So I had a meaty Christmas holiday, but now I won't be eating it for a long time because I don't
Yeah,
need
no.
it when I need it. But I'm not going to give it up. And I can, but I think you can have cleaner, more compassionate meat eating less
Yes.
than cheaper, more often.
I probably eat more venison than most people because we live near the New Forest, and the deer get killed.
Yeah.
They get culled by an expert with a high velocity rifle. The deer die pretty much instantly. And I know that the deer have run around and had a life. They haven't just had an existence of less than 2 years in a small cage. And that sort of meat eating is I'm very happy with.
And the thing is, each one of us, no matter what we are, each species on the planet survives by consuming another one.
Yes, it does. Yeah.
Were you at the winter gathering? Not this past one, but the one last year.
Yes.
When Gary the Toad, what's his name? Gordon the Toad. Gordon McLellan talking, or maybe it was Graham Harvey. I can't. It was the theme was animism, but talking about that notion that we are ensouled beings, and the animistic worldview is that everything is ensouled. Yep. So if I eat lettuce, it's an ensouled being, and if there are any insects on that, they too are ensouled. So that as an ensouled being, I consume ensouled beings, which also feed the ensouled parasites and viruses and bacteria in my system, that we are all part of an ensouled system. And I thought that was really lovely. But the difference between a deer that ran around the woods and had a life is very, very different to the one that's in a cage, like you say. And I just like that we are all ensouled. And I mean, we have to be practical, that if there's no hierarchy within the web of life, then we are not higher than animals, and animals are not higher than plants. So if we shouldn't eat meat, then we shouldn't be eating vegetables either, because whose life has primacy? I don't know.
But I think part of it is respect. I mean, if we need timber, we can be considerate, and we can speak to the tree. We can say thank you for your offering, and we will try to plant more trees. If a field of wheat is reaped, you can say thank you to that field. I think as Druids we can live with respect for the environment, for the land that we dwell in. And sometimes it's just that simple awareness of saying hello to a woodland as you go in, and thank you when you leave. Just accepting that there is a spiritual presence. There is a deep world that exists along with our superficial physical world.
I think so, and it's that mindfulness, that paying attention to the world around us and the world within us, and seeing us in as part of that web. And I mean, in Indigenous cultures do it, and we do that as Druids, is actually practicing gratitude for what we have.
Yeah, for sure.
And honoring that. And I had a months ago with a chat with Christopher Hughes, and he's been, I'm sure he's finished it now, doing a series going around the world looking
death practices.
Death practices. But the one that really he was talking about on my chat was when he went to Seattle, and where they have this process called terramation. So the dead body is taken in and essentially is composted. And I assume there's some kind of anaerobic digester that converts the body to compost, and then the family can take that compost back. And I love the idea that I could be compost for, we don't have it here, unfortunately, but that, I could be nurturing carrots and being lettuces or feeding becoming grass to feed cows, whatever it is. That just lovely. I just think that just I found that really, really comforting. There are ways of us contributing, and like I know this, it's like from dust to dust. You came, whatever it is, we go back into the earth. So we go into graveyards or ashes from being incinerated in a, what do you call those things, crematorium. And but actually to go back and be composted, I think so. It sounds like a wonderful idea. Now, maybe there are downsides. It's just when you present it, because when you get a new idea, you go, "This is the way," and then you go, "Well, actually, no, there are prices to be paid for this." So I don't know, but just having spoken to him, it sounded like a wonderful idea. Now, Pat Booker has a question. If you had a choice between a steak grown in a lab without killing animals and a free-range venison steak, which would you say is more ethical?
So the choice is a free-roaming animal and a
venison steak that's a free-range venison steak, or a steak grown in a lab.
I would say you could probably. I mean, there's lots of details about a steak grown in a lab, and by that I assume you mean in terms of a cloned tissue culture that effectively is identified as not having consciousness and being produced as an item of meat. I still wouldn't have a problem with the deer. It's very unlikely that we're going to introduce wolves very shortly in the UK. So the deer have to be culled, because otherwise we won't have any more trees. They will consume the saplings. So the deer have to be culled anyway. And I don't have a problem if the deer are dead and have to be dead, enjoying their flesh.
I think I'm on your side. I just have a thing about something so processed as growing in a lab. And, we're talking about, doctors will tell you avoid processed food, have it as close to its natural state as possible. So I'd rather not eat meat if lab grown versus nothing.
I think the subtleties of fat and muscle development within an animal that is roaming in the landscape feel like that they will, just in a culinary sense, they'll be more tasty than something that is probably a relatively uniform block of let's say nutritional, potentially ultra processed food, but let's say it's just a block of something that's uniform. I think our human taste buds require a little bit of variation, and just having a block of nutritional something, that feels very, very similar to corn. We eat quite a lot of corn in our household.
I used to. I don't anymore. But I used to, but I don't anymore. But funny, Liz Hill says, I don't have any of the stats, but it seems to me that lab grown requires significantly more energy than wild game or pastured. Important consideration. And then Francis, who is English but living in Finland, in academia there is now a deep interest in sacred ecologies in terms of a drive for governments to work with knowledge holders who are stewards of the land, especially within indigenous societies. And
I know that's particularly strong in Finland.
Yeah. Well, we've gone over our time. We're meant to be going over to the hearth.
Oh my
So
word!
such we're only, I don't say, a little bit into, I could talk to you for hours. So it's been such a joy talking to you, Gary. So we're going to go over to the hearth shortly. So for our OBOD members, we'll see you over on the other side. So I'll let you say goodnight to other viewers.
Good night, everyone. Live good lives. Think about what you're doing. Be happy. And be wonderful to everyone else. And maybe they'll be wonderful for you.
Anyway, I'll see you on the other side. I'm just going to send you into the green room. So, listen, thank you all for joining me this evening. And I hope you enjoyed the chat with Gary as much as I did. And yes, Easy Thorn, I hope you will subscribe to the Heart so you can keep up with these. Brilliant. So I will look forward to seeing you next week, and enjoy the rest of your evening, morning, afternoon, or if you're watching a recording of this. And I look forward to you joining me again for a other chat next week. So in the meantime, be well and slán go fóill.